Hi, so it's Richard and Craig here at Monash University in Melbourne, Australia, Clayton campus. It's going to be a beautiful 37 degrees today out in the lemon-scented lawn. And this is our feedback video for week 4 of the course. So Craig, an interesting week, a lot of comments this week. We're exploring heartfulness, obviously, and cultivating some positive states of mind. Quite a lot came up around self-compassion. Do you want to say something about that?
Yeah, I think it's not something we commonly think about or commonly practice in day-to-day life. And it certainly brings up a lot of things. For some people, it's not quite so scientific as other aspects of the course. And for others, it brings up emotional issues. And I guess that's a part of mindfulness as well, is that it brings to awareness things that are often a little bit beneath the surface.
Yes.
I think it's just really important when those kinds of things arise to just go at one's own pace. Start with the little things, work up to it, because like anything else, moving from self-criticism and judgment to self-compassion is a process that takes a little bit of time.
Yes. Kristin Neff, one of the leading figures in the field, talks about backdraft and how when we start to bring attention to things that maybe haven't been acknowledged and bring self-compassion to difficulties, we can experience a bit of a flash sometimes of awareness. But yeah, I'd agree, just taking it slowly, very useful thing to do.
Yeah. And one other thing too about self-compassion, do we have to be compassionate for others? Do we have to be compassionate for ourselves? And we don't have to. We don't have to do anything really that doesn't really resonate with us. But if we're practicing mindfulness, we might start to notice the effect of self-criticism and judgment, or being judgmental and angry and critical of others. And if we start to bring awareness to that, we might notice the effect that has on ourselves emotionally or physically. Because things like anger and hostility have even been found to age us more rapidly down on the level of the DNA of the cells.
Yes.
And I mean, this actually goes to the very core of our physical being as well as emotional being. So we can start to bring awareness to the impact that has. And,
definitely activating the stress response as well.
Yeah.
A lot of comments actually on this idea of common humanity, being aware of other people's suffering, and some people were a bit confused about that. Kristin Neff talks, who, as I said, is a leading figure in the field of self-compassion. She talks about self-compassion consisting of mindfulness, friendliness to ourselves, and common humanity. And so the idea is not really to compare ourselves to others or think, some people are suffering more than I am. That's maybe taking some of what she said out of context a little bit. Really, the point is when we're suffering, if we become aware that other people are also experiencing, probably right now, some version of that somewhere in the world, we can feel less alone. And part of the problem sometimes is feeling quite alone when we're suffering. So just to bring to mind the fact that this is a common human experience can actually be very, very powerful.
I think too, and it comes up a lot in the courses I've taken over many years in mindfulness, is that as people become more mindful and aware of our own things, our own anxieties and reactions and judgments and fears and how that impacts on us, they often describe being more aware of others, and they actually start to notice things, somebody else is in the same boat that I was.
Yes.
I can see somebody reacting in the kind of way I react. So that awareness very often leads to a greater level of empathy and compassion for others, because in a sense we're all in the same boat, experiencing slightly different things. That's individual, but on another level, these sort of experiences of fear and anger and frustration and so on are actually common to us all. Yeah.
And that's one of the beautiful things about mindfulness, and in particular the heartfulness aspect, that we begin by practicing it with ourselves, but it then just very naturally starts to ripple out to others, and we start to change our relationship with the people around us and with the planet ultimately. So it's a very useful thing to cultivate. Yeah.
One thing that had come up from a few learners this week was some were saying, I'm not critical. Is that a problem? Is that a form of psychopathology? And not necessarily at all. In fact, it's useful not to criticise. But so long as that not being critical means not noticing or not being reflective. And so it's a different thing to actually things that do need to come to awareness, things that we do need to address. If not being critical just means I'm ignoring those things, then that's not necessarily going to lead to sort of growth and insight.
Yeah.
So there is a kind of honesty and objectivity that we need, but not to engage in that intense personal self-criticism, which can actually be disabling.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, self-criticism serves a purpose in some ways, doesn't it? I mean, a lot of people use it to motivate themselves or to avoid making mistakes or to, maintain relationships. You say something silly to hurt someone's feelings and you're like, oh, idiot, why did I say that? But it can really get out of hand, can't it?
Yes.
And so certainly learning to monitor that and to just, as you were saying, some self-reflection is a useful thing, but self-criticism quite often has costs that really make it less useful. So.
Yes, I've seen some research previously on guilt, and there's that kind of chronic guilty about things that we don't even need to be guilty about, just this sort of feeling guilty all the time, which is not at all helpful. And there's another kind of guilt which is, perhaps should be a different word for it, but when we do something cruel or do something that's really maybe was harmful for others, to actually feel a kind of concern that makes us want to improve or makes us want to make amends, and that's actually quite a healthy thing. It's associated with better mental health.
Sure, or without beating ourselves up about what happened. Just seeing it clearly, that discernment that we get with mindfulness.
Yes.
Seeing it clearly, changing what needs to be changed. Yeah. Loving kindness meditation also brings up a lot for people. Quite a lot of comments around that. I mean, first of all, it's quite an unnatural thing, particularly to bring an attitude of loving kindness or to send kind thoughts to someone who's maybe hurt us or that we have some conflict with. But it's an interesting thing because, I mean, if you really think about it logically, as we said in the course, people who are difficult to be around tend to be really unhappy people. And people who are happy tend to be quite kind of easy to be around. And so from a rational, logical kind of perspective, it actually makes sense, as strange as it might seem, to wish happiness to someone who's difficult, because then maybe they'd become a little bit easier.
Yeah, and if we've experienced some really significant hurt at somebody else's hands, I don't think this is easy and not necessarily going to be the useful first person to take on board. It might be just much better to start with those just little hurts, those little things in day-to-day life, but to cultivate an attitude that's able to embrace, to seek to understand others, because very often doing something cruel to others arises from some intense sort of conflict within a person's own psyche and so on. So, but starting with those small things and cultivating that sort of attitude of kindness for others makes it easy in due course, if we so wish, to actually be able to resolve and move on. And it's got, something to do with the other person, but also it's got much to do with us at some stage being able to move on too.
It's really about transforming our own minds. So it starts with us. We first of all get to release some of our own tension and suffering around it, which can be quite good. And it certainly creates the possibility of openness and maybe a new way of interacting with people that we've had conflict with, rather than just preparing ourselves for war and activating the stress response by thinking about resentment, that kind of thing. Yeah,
another topic that came up, and just to briefly mention too, about perfectionism, that there are maybe two kinds of things that could go by that name. There's a kind of perfectionism which is driven by anxiety and fear of not being 100%, and that kind of thing that can totally dominate a person's life and actually sabotage learning and insight, which is different to that kind of perfectionism which may be striving to do things better. Like somebody like Murray Rose, outstanding swimmer, and he described constantly honing his technique and improving it, but he was incredibly mindful what he was doing. And it wasn't anxiety driving, it was this love of improvement through engagement and being very present with what he was doing. And I think that, if I bought a new car, I'd be very happy for somebody who was striving perfectionism who put that car together. But, doing it through mindfulness is very different to being that kind of perfectionism which is driven by anxiety.
Yes, of course. Mindfulness being about really accepting ourselves the way we are as a starting point, and then, of course, making the changes that need to be made. So, we'd like to just thank you once again for the great conversation that's been happening on the discussion board, and please keep commenting, keep exploring the activities, keep applying mindfulness in your lives, because we're hearing a lot of really great feedback about things that people are noticing and changes that are taking place. So, just like to thank you once again, and we'll see you next week.
Excellent.